Today's message title is The In-Between. And I call it that because in Nehemiah chapter 1, Nehemiah has a burden from God for his ancestral homeland. And he's praying and praying and praying, and nothing seems to be happening. So I labeled it that because I don't know in your life or in my life or in family, sometimes we have that burden from God and then nothing happens. And what do we do about it? Nehemiah is a classic example. He was burdened with the city of Jerusalem being in ruin. Okay, God, I'm going to pray and 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 pray. God, why aren't you doing anything? And pray and pray and pray. And sometimes we get into those moments of life, and they're not bad. They're a learning curve. They're a place of growing faith. Sometimes, if we don't treat them right, they're a place of decreasing faith. But I pray today that this would be an encouragement to help you grow in your faith, to know that sometimes God just kind of makes you wait. And I've heard it all over the world in different churches and different contexts that God's delay is not a denial. Sometimes God answers you with wait, or in my time. And so I promised that I would show you the timeline. And so here's, all right, maybe not. There we go. Here's your timeline. If you can read it, I will point it out. I'm sorry. So in Nehemiah chapter 1, we learn that Nehemiah is in the citadel of Susa during the month of Kislev, which is this month right here, which is equal to our end of November, early December. This is where the story of Nehemiah starts. During the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, I was in the citadel of Susa. Chapter 2, during the month of Nisan. So you go from Kislev, you go 1, 2, 3, 4 months into our late March, early April. And Nehemiah has now waited 4 months. Some of us might think, that's not that long. I've been waiting for years, Pastor. I get it. It doesn't seem like a long time. But the point is, he had to wait. You imagine you're off on a trip, or you move and you live somewhere else, and your family house that you knew as a child burnt to the ground, and you weren't able to get back to help out for 4 months. That's a long time. 4 months doesn't seem like a long time for those who've been waiting for years or decades or longer, but 4 months can be a long time. And so Nehemiah has been waiting for 4 months, this in-between period of time. Maybe he was like the psalmist and said, how long, God, must I wait to see your provision? Or God, how come you're allowing this evil nation of Persia to be blessed over the nation of Israel that you said your name would dwell in and it would be a place for your glory to reside? Why are these things not happening? But you know what Nehemiah didn't do? Nehemiah didn't sit back and whine about it, which takes props, because sometimes I just like to whine about things. And it's not that I think sometimes people, I have a book in my office. It's called The End of the Superhero Pastor, or something along that lines. And the whole idea is that people in church context, sometimes sitting in the pews all their lives, seeing the minister up front, get this idea that ministers are ministers and they're not human. But I want to tell you for a very good fact that this minister is very much human, and he is very much like you guys at times, and he likes to whine about things. And I have to catch myself, because it's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it helps me to go where I need to go, but Nehemiah doesn't just sit and pout. Nehemiah doesn't just sit and cry. Nehemiah does something about it. So before I waste too much time on my topic of whining, let us read Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. And so Nehemiah says this in Nehemiah chapter 2. During the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was set before him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had never been sad in his presence. So the king says to me, why are you sad? Why, when you're not even sick? This is nothing but depression. I was overwhelmed with fear. And I replied to the king, may the king live forever. Why should I not be sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Then the king asked me, what is your request? So I prayed to the God of heaven and answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor with you, send me to Judah and to the city where my ancestors are buried, so that I may rebuild it. One thing I'm learning from Nehemiah is that a person in his position is very well off to, in the in-between, when we're begging God and we're seeking after God, is to sit down with pen and paper and make a plan. When God does answer my prayer, here's what I want to do. Here's where I'm going to go. Here's what I'd like to see happen. Nehemiah does not just go, okay, God, like, come on. You gave me this burden. Why did you give me such a burden if you're not going to fulfill your promises? You said you said you'd look after your people, but it doesn't look like it. But here we are, and I'm praying, and you're not doing anything. I think sometimes maybe God looks at us and says, yeah, you're praying, great, you're looking to me for answers, but if I say yes to you, what are you going to do about it? Could you imagine if Nehemiah wasn't prepared when the king's like, why are you sad? Well, my city's in ruins, I just can't. What do you want to do about it? I'll have to get back to you on that one. Like, what a waste of time. You spent 4 months praying, and now you got to go back and take time to plan. So in the in-between, Nehemiah was making a plan. Already, he's looked to the future. He had vision. Okay, what's going on with my home city? Okay, I want to rebuild it. I don't know what that takes. So I'm going to pray. I'm going to seek wisdom. I'm going to seek God for guidance. And now I have a plan. So I'm before the king, and he's terrified. I love the fact that the Bible is very blunt. Far too often we're told as believers, don't have fear, don't have fear. I said it a few weeks back. I was told by a minister, the presence of fear is the absence of faith. And it wrecked me for a couple of years because I just felt like anytime I had fear, I wasn't living right for God. And I learned that was just total nonsense. Because right here in our portion of Nehemiah, a man of faith, Nehemiah, a man who spent 4 long months praying and seeking God, says, I was terrified. I'm standing before the ruler of earth. And he's like, why are you sad? Uh-oh. And I found out why he was so afraid. Because apparently back in the day, being the ruler of the earth, physically, like the king of the known globe, kind of made them think that they were something special. Like, hey, look at me, I'm royalty. You should never be sad in my presence. And it was just something they thought would bring joy to everyone. Like, oh, I get to see the king of the world. Oh, yes, I'm just instantly happy now. No, Nehemiah went in and he's like, I'm scared because the king had the right to say, you're sad in my presence. I don't like that. You're ruining the mood. Off with your head. And so Nehemiah is scared. A man of faith is scared. Whoa, go figure, hey? Like, so I learned that when we're praying and seeking God for answers and we think he's taking his sweet little time, start putting a plan together. See what could go. See what could happen. Maybe you're trying to find a new employment in life, and you're just begging God for new employment. When's the last time you updated your resume? You're looking for something, and you're asking God, please help me, but you just sit still, not looking for the thing you're asking. So it's good in our prayers to also make a plan. And then if you're afraid, that's all right. But don't let your fear keep you from where God is taking you. Notice that Nehemiah didn't say, I was afraid, and so I just ran from the king and didn't ask. He's like, no, I was afraid. And then he asked me, what do you want? So I prayed, God, help me. Take this fear away from me. Let me share with the king boldly. King Artaxerxes, I want to go back to Judah. I want to rebuild it. Oh, you do you? All right. So why is it so important then that Nehemiah gives us these dates, gives us the time frame, gives us all this detail? Well, it's important for God to tell the date of these things and when they happened, to show that Nehemiah prayed and waited for all these months with a kind of heart described previously in Nehemiah. During those 4 months, Nehemiah's prayer was likely, Lord, either take the burden or show me how to be the man to answer the burden. I think that would be a good prayer for us all, just to start praying, God, make me the person that can answer the burden, or just remove the burden from me, because I just can't stand it anymore. I'm tired of praying for the same thing over and over and over again. But maybe, you're the person for the job. Maybe you're the one that has the shoulders broad enough to answer the call that God has placed on your life, to pray. Some people are just born with the gift of intercession. I've shared it once before. There is a guy I read about for one of my classes. His name was John Hyde. They nicknamed him Praying Hyde. He was a missionary to Africa. The whole time he was there, he never spoke once, I believe. All he did was they would have an elevated platform for the pulpit to stand, and the speaker would stand there, and the entire time before the service began, like hours, till after the service was over, he would tuck himself underneath, immediately, directly underneath the podium, and he would stand there, or lay there, or however it was that he was there, and he would just pray for the person speaking, that God's power would go out to the people. And thousands of Africans got saved, and that's all he ever did. He just prayed and prayed and prayed. One point he was so sick, he had a headache, he didn't want to do anything, so he's like, I'm just going to lay in bed all day. But instead of laying bed in home and complaining, oh God, my head, and asking God to take the headache away, he told his co-workers, carry my bed out under the tree and let me pray under the tree while I have my headache. Someone came by, what are you doing here? I'm praying. Praying to who? Praying to God. Who's God? Let me tell you who God is. He ran back, got his chief from the village. The chief came back to Praying Hyde, sitting under his tree, still with the headache, by the way. Who's this God you talk of? Let me tell you. Okay, the whole village got saved. But all he did in ministry was pray. And then he died one day, because that's what happens, right? And they found out the cause of death was his heart shifted. I don't know how that's possible, but it went from one side of his chest to the other side of his chest, and that's not biologically possible, and that's what killed him. He was so burdened with prayer that it moved his heart. It's an odd story, I know, but that was his burden, to pray, and he did it. So God, either take the burden from my heart, or show me how to be the person to answer the burden. And so on this particular day, Nehemiah noted that he had never been sad or depressed in the presence of the king. And on this day, the king took notice. And Nehemiah became dreadfully afraid. I find it odd that in all of Nehemiah's life, he never had a bad day up until now. Never went to work sad, never went to work with the family problem. He had family in Persia, he wasn't alone. Maybe he wasn't married, maybe he was married. Either way, there's problems. But he never went to the king like, I hate my job. Might drink poison today, but hey, that's my job. I really wish I worked for a better king. Never in all his ministry did he go to work sad, except for this particular day. And never in the records of our Bible does it say that, hey, the king noticed his cupbearer wasn't feeling particularly joyful today. No, this one time, this only time is it recorded anywhere. Why? Well, sometimes that's the way God works. The king could care less about your mood until God says, hey, I want you to notice your cupbearer's mood. Nehemiah, you're sad. Yeah, I'm sad. Why? Don't kill me, please. Well, why are you sad? Well, I just found out my country's in ruins. Never been there, but it's my country. I'm an Israelite. You might know that already. The Babylons came and destroyed it, and I'm really hung up on the fact that they're not living well. And I really want to do something about it. Okay, well, what do you want to do? I'd like to go back and rebuild it. And here's the other thing Nehemiah does when he's praying. He's making a plan. He's not allowing fear to get in his way. But he is the example of giving it to God. He didn't go around the citadel of Persia and Susa. Hey, guess what? I heard that our city's in ruins. You want to do something about it? Hey, could I get you? Like, if you just donate $10, we could have... I just need someone to help me out. Like, if you could just do this and we could do that. And he didn't go around kind of like micromanaging the situation. He just said, God, you gave me this burden. I don't know what to do about it, but it won't go away, so I'm just going to keep praying about it. He prayed and left it to the Lord instead of dropping hints and trying to manipulate the situation. So are we making the same mistake when we are praying for certain burdens? Are we trying to change someone else's heart in our prayer for burden? Or are we instead leaving it to the Lord to do it himself? Now, I'm not saying God won't use you to do the changing of someone's heart through his power, but are we the classic human getting ahead of God and saying, hey, like, God's back there, but I really know he wants to change you, so I'm just going to jump in and be like, yeah, okay, and then find ourselves in a pile of mud because that's not what God wanted. He just wanted you to pray for that person, and he was equipping someone else in the in-between to go and be the person that person needed. Meanwhile, you're here on the outside doing all the prayer for someone else to be equipped to do the work. The same work, it's just on a different field, if that makes sense. So be like Nehemiah. In the time of prayer in the in-between, try and plan what it is you feel God is leading you to do. Seeking his wisdom, seeking his guidance. Don't be afraid. If you have to go ask for whatever, don't be afraid. And then know that you got to leave it up to God. And so it's funny that Nehemiah's prayer gets answered. And then he prays. Yes, he's asking about Jerusalem. Let me pray. And so we have some things in the 4 months where Nehemiah was praying that I want to look at. The 4 months in prayer were not only spent in talking to God, but they were also spent listening to him. I know that's an odd concept, right? Like, I thought prayer was just, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God. Do this, do this, do this. I need. I want. But for Nehemiah and for us, prayer is also listening to God and then working out a spirit-led plan for what to do when God did open the door. Mama. And so, here's the first one in Nehemiah 2:6. Nehemiah gave the king a deadline. He's never been to Jerusalem. He has no idea what it looks like, but he still said to the king, I can rebuild it in such and such time. Wow. Right on. It's been 150 years and they haven't been able to redo it, but hey, if you can do it in such time, that's awesome. Because Nehemiah, in prayer, God, I want to rebuild Jerusalem. Okay, here's how you're going to do it, Nehemiah. Here's how long it's going to take. It's not recorded in the history of Nehemiah. It's not in his book, but I can assume that's what was going on, and he gave the king a deadline. And then he told the king in Nehemiah 2:7, I need letters. Well, why do you need letters? Can you imagine the boldness of faith to say, hey, I'm going to Judah to rebuild the city, and then, hey, well, now that you're at it, can I go with some king guards and some royal officers so that I can be protected along the way? Like, my God's good, and he'll rebuild the city, but I still need some added protection. Imagine the awkwardness. But Nehemiah didn't care. He's laying it out for the king. This is what I need. I've got this deadline. I need your assistance to get it done. He wasn't afraid to ask for help. Sometimes I just feel like it's my burden. Let me fix it. Right? Just let me help you. No, I don't need your help. I can't get it finished. Well, you're right there. Just ask for help. Nehemiah wasn't afraid to ask for help. It wasn't all up to him. He what's that word I'm looking for? He delegated. Thank you. He delegated. And then in Nehemiah 2, verse 8, he planned ahead. He told the king what would be needed before he even got there. I gotta tell you, that's godly wisdom, because he had no idea what Jerusalem looked like. But because he was praying and seeking after God, he wasn't shocked when he got there. Like, oh my goodness, it's worse than I thought. I got to go back to the king and ask for like 7 more years of supplies. No, he knew. That's like in its own right, that's a miracle, that he knew exactly what would be needed. And he knew what was to be the work ahead. He asked for letters for assistance, but in asking for letters, he knew to plan ahead, and so he asked the king to send him letters so he could give them to a guy who owned a forest, saying that I need your lumber. I need you to mill all these trees so we can use the wood to rebuild the fences and the gates and the pillar walls and all the things that need be done for the gates of Jerusalem. He knew the work ahead because he's quoted as saying, I'm going to rebuild the gates, I'm going to rebuild the citadels, I'm going to rebuild the city wall, and I'm going to build a house for myself to live in when I get there. And he knew like exact location. Nehemiah knew the needs by carefully and patiently seeking after God. It reminds me of the story in the Gospels where Jesus is telling us to count the cost of salvation. And he gives them plain, like, logical builder's advice. You're going to build a house. Okay, good. Are you just going to start building, or are you going to plan ahead and count the cost? Are you going to count the cost of lumber, the cost of concrete, the cost of building materials, the cost of labor? Or are you just going to jump headfirst into a dirty situation? He was relating it to our faith walk and getting this journey of faith started. But you can take it, I think, either way. When we've got a burden for God, do we just jump right in? Without prayer, we're just like, okay, God, this is my burden. Whoa! Oh, God, help me. I'm in too deep. Help me, help me, help me. I knew you called me here with my burden. Now, help me, I'm drowning. Plan ahead. The in-between is not a denial. It's training season. It's where we prep ourselves for the work ahead, or the work ahead. It's the time where God builds our faith. He gives us little tidbits here and there, and you're like, wow, God, thank you for that. Wow, God, thanks for that. And then when the burden is revealed and the work goes, you're like, woohoo! Wow! You did it. And you used me to do it. Don't take it as God's ignoring you. God didn't ignore Nehemiah. He didn't ignore the people of Israel, and he has not ignored you. You are seated in the heavens in Christ. Your anchor is behind the veil, and he has you right under his watchful eye. And he's looking at you all saying, yeah, I know I gave you a burden. And I know the burden I gave you is not an easy one to carry. But with me and by my power, you are the person right for the job. Do not take the delay as me ignoring you. Take the delay as the time I'm giving you to plan, to train, to seek guidance, to get help along the way, to gather a team together to do the work that I'm going to call you to do. The city of Jerusalem had been in rubble for 150 years. And as we'll read further on in the story of Nehemiah, if I remember accurately, he rebuilt the walls in less than a year. 150 years, and the work wasn't able to get started or finished or anything. But the right man for the job, with the right amount of training, with the right amount of faith, with the right amount of prayer, with the right people, with God on their side, got it done in less than a year. So your burden is not too big for God, because God's the one who gave it to you in the first place. So pray. I know it might sound odd, but put a plan together. Don't be afraid. And then when God opens doors, full throttle. Be ready. Amen. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, holy is your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth like it is in heaven. Give us each day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Father, lead us away from temptation, away from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.